Hello, welcome to the Echoes of Shadows channel. Today we're diving into an intriguing story about Ethan Harris. While covering a presidential debate in Washington, D.C., he begins to realize that something much darker is happening behind the scenes. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more dark and chilling stories. Thank you.
My name is Ethan Harris, a journalism student at Columbia University in New York City. When I received the opportunity to cover one of the presidential debates as part of my internship at a prominent news outlet, I couldn't have been more excited. For someone who had spent the last few years studying the intricacies of media, politics, and the power of the press, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. It felt like the culmination of all my hard work, and I was eager to make a strong impression. The debate was set to take place in Washington, D.C., at a venue steeped in history and political significance. The air was electric, charged with the anticipation of the event. The candidates had spent months building up to this moment, and now they were about to face off in a battle of wits and words that could very well determine the future of the nation. The media presence was immense. Cameras, microphones, and journalists from every major outlet, all vying for the best angles, the sharpest questions, and the most memorable sound bites. As I walked into the venue, I was struck by the sheer scale of it all. The hall was massive, its high ceilings adorned with banners and flags representing the ideals of democracy. The seats were filled with reporters, analysts, and political insiders, each with their own agenda, their own perspective on what this debate meant for the future of the country. I took my place at the back of the room where the interns and junior reporters were stationed. From here, I had a clear view of the stage, where the candidates would soon take their places. The lights dimmed slightly as the debate was about to begin, and the room fell silent in anticipation. As the candidates began their opening statements, I focused on taking notes, trying to capture the essence of what was being said. My laptop hummed quietly as I typed, the screen casting a soft glow on my face. The candidates were sharp, each one trying to outmaneuver the other with promises, accusations, and rhetoric that echoed through the hall. It was intense, and I could feel the tension in the room rising with every passing minute. But as I sat there, something strange began to happen. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow moving at the back of the room, just beyond the crowd. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a product of my tired mind after days of preparation and little sleep. But as the debate raged on, the shadow reappeared, flickering at the edge of my vision as if it was intentionally avoiding being seen. My focus began to waver. My fingers, once dancing across the keyboard, slowed as I found myself glancing more frequently toward the back of the room. The shadow, whatever it was, seemed to be drawing closer. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination running wild, but the feeling lingered. A cold unease began to creep over me, settling into the pit of my stomach. When the debate finally ended, the tension in the room was palpable. The candidates left the stage, and the room buzzed with the energy of reporters scrambling to file their stories. I gathered my things, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me during the debate. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a wave of relief, hoping that the fresh air would clear my mind. I ordered an Uber and stood on the sidewalk, my mind still replaying the events of the night. The streets of Washington, D.C. were quiet at this late hour, the usual hustle and bustle of the city replaced by the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional passerby. I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to ward off the chill that had settled into my bones. When the car pulled up, I reached for the door handle, but the driver hesitated. "Is your friend not coming with you?" he asked, glancing behind me. I turned around, my heart skipping a beat. There was no one there. The sidewalk was empty, just me and the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. "I'm alone," I said, my voice shaking slightly. The driver gave me a puzzled look but didn't press the matter. I slid into the back seat, my mind racing. The car was warm, but I couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled over me. As we drove through the quiet streets of Washington, D.C., I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the shadow again. But there was nothing, just the darkened buildings and the occasional pedestrian walking their dog. When I finally arrived at my apartment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Home was a small, cozy studio on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a place that had always been my sanctuary. It was cluttered with the remnants of my life as a student, textbooks, notebooks, and the ever-present stack of coffee cups that had accumulated over countless late-night study sessions. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and headed straight to the bathroom to wash away the stress of the day. But as I stood there, the water running over my hands, I saw it again. The shadow moving behind me in the mirror's reflection. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. But there was nothing there. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide with fear. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was just exhausted, the stress of the debate taking its toll on my mind. But that didn't explain the driver's comment. He had seen something, or someone, standing behind me. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with thoughts of the shadow. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside my window had me on edge. I felt as if I was being watched, as if there was someone, something in the room with me. The next morning, I tried to put it out of my mind. I had work to do, articles to write, and deadlines to meet. But the memory of that shadow haunted me, lingering in the corners of my thoughts. I couldn't focus. My editor noticed my distraction and pulled me aside, asking if everything was okay. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. As the week went on, the shadow made its presence known in more unsettling ways. It was no longer confined to the back of the debate hall or the fleeting moments in the mirror. It began to invade every aspect of my life, making itself known in the most mundane of tasks. Objects in my apartment seemed to move on their own. My keys, which I always left by the door, would appear on the kitchen counter. My phone, left charging on my nightstand, would somehow end up in the living room. Each time I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that I must have moved them without realizing it. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. And then there were the footsteps. Late at night, when the city had quieted down and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren, I would hear them. Soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable in the stillness of my apartment. My body would freeze, every nerve on edge, as the footsteps grew louder, moving through the apartment. I would lie there, paralyzed by fear, listening as they moved closer, always stopping just before reaching my bedroom. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet, a relic from my high school days, and crept through the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps had stopped, but the fear lingered, a suffocating presence that seemed to fill the air. I checked every room, every closet, but there was nothing there. Just the silence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on me. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the stress of the debate and the long hours at work were taking their toll. But the shadow refused to be ignored. It followed me to work, to the grocery store, even on my morning runs through Central Park. I would catch glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye, always just out of reach, always watching. The breaking point came one night when I was working late, trying to finish an article on a tight deadline. The office was empty, the only light coming from the glow of my computer screen. I was completely absorbed in my work when I felt it. A cold breeze, like the breath of something unseen, brushing against the back of my neck. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and slowly turned around. There she was, the shadowy figure of a woman standing at the far end of the room, her form barely visible in the dim light. She was indistinct, more of an outline than a solid figure, but I could feel her presence, intense and suffocating. My heart raced as I stared at her, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in that moment of fear and uncertainty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly dissolved into the darkness, leaving me alone in the empty office. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But there was no rational explanation for it. The shadow had crossed a line, stepping out of the periphery and into the center of my world, making itself undeniably real. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with finding out who or what the shadow was. My work suffered as I spent hours researching, combing through old newspaper archives, and diving into the dark corners of the internet. I was desperate for answers, for some way to rid myself of this presence that had invaded my life. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I stumbled across a name: Catherine Ross. She was a journalist, just like me, who had worked at the same news outlet back in the 1970s. Catherine had been known for her tenacity and her willingness to dig into the darkest corners of politics and power, but her career had been cut short when she mysteriously disappeared while investigating a high-profile corruption scandal involving a prominent senator. The details of her disappearance were vague, shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some believed she had been killed to silence her, while others thought she had simply gone into hiding, fearing for her life. But no one knew for sure. Her body was never found, and the case eventually went cold, fading into the background as new scandals and tragedies took its place. As I read more about Catherine, I began to feel a connection to her, a strange sense of kinship. Like me, she had been driven by a desire to uncover the truth, to expose the rot at the heart of power. But unlike me, she had paid the ultimate price for her pursuit of justice. It was then that I realized the shadow had to be Catherine. Her spirit, trapped between worlds, still seeking the truth that had eluded her in life. But why had she chosen me? Why now, decades after her disappearance? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I had to find them. I started digging into the corruption scandal that Catherine had been investigating at the time of her disappearance. It was a complex web of deceit, involving powerful figures in Washington, D.C., and large sums of money being funneled into secret accounts. The deeper I delved, the more I realized how dangerous this story had been, and still was. If the people involved had gone to such lengths to silence Catherine, what would they do to someone like me, who was now reopening old wounds? But I couldn't stop. I was driven by the same force that had compelled Catherine all those years ago, the need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As I dug deeper, the shadow became more aggressive. It was no longer content with lurking in the background. It began to invade my dreams, filling my nights with visions of Catherine's final moments, her fear, her desperation as she realized she was being hunted. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, her name on my lips. One night I dreamed that I was in an old, abandoned building, the walls crumbling and the air thick with dust. I was walking down a long, dark hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. At the end of the hallway, a door stood ajar, and from inside I could hear muffled voices, angry, desperate. I pushed open the door and found myself in a small room, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. Catherine was there, her back to me, facing a man in a dark suit. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel the malice radiating off him. He was threatening her, telling her to drop the story, to walk away, or face the consequences. But Catherine refused. She stood her ground, her voice steady as she told him she would never back down, that the truth would come out, no matter what. The man stepped closer, his hand reaching into his jacket. Catherine's eyes widened with fear, but before she could react, he pulled out a gun and fired. The sound was deafening, echoing through the small room. Catherine fell to the floor, blood pooling around her as the man turned and walked away, leaving her to die alone. I woke up screaming. The image of Catherine's lifeless body burned into my mind. I knew then that I was getting too close, that the people who had killed Catherine would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But I also knew that I couldn't stop. I owed it to Catherine to finish what she had started, to bring her killers to justice. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day at the library, combing through old records and archives, trying to piece together the final puzzle. It was late afternoon when I finally found it. A small, seemingly insignificant piece of information that connected the senator Catherine had been investigating to a powerful lobbyist who was still active in Washington, D.C. The lobbyist had connections to several major corporations and was known for his ruthless tactics. I had no doubt that he was the one who had ordered Catherine's murder and that he was still out there, living his life without a care in the world. But now I had the evidence. I had the proof that Catherine had died for, and I was determined to make sure that her story would finally be told. Apartment, staring at the evidence I had gathered, I felt the shadow's presence more strongly than ever before. Catherine was there, watching me, waiting for me to take the next step. I could feel her fear, her desperation, but also her determination. She was counting on me to finish what she had started. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and called my editor, telling him that I had a major story that needed to be published immediately. He was skeptical at first, but when I laid out the evidence, he agreed to meet me at the office to go over it. As I gathered my things, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear that had been gnawing at me for days was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. I knew that I was putting myself in danger, but it didn't matter. Catherine's story needed to be told, and I was the only one who could do it. When I arrived at the office, my editor was already there, waiting for me. I laid out the evidence on his desk, explaining how it all connected: the senator, the lobbyist, and Catherine's disappearance. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawning on his face. This was big, bigger than anything we had ever covered before. "We need to go public with this," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "This could bring down some of the most powerful people in Washington." But before we could take the next step, the lights in the office flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine as the shadow reappeared, more solid than before. Catherine was there, her presence filling the room, but she wasn't alone. Another shadow emerged from the darkness, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured. He moved toward us, his presence menacing and cold. I realized with a jolt that this was the man from my dream, the one who had killed Catherine. My editor backed away, fear etched on his face, but I stood my ground. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man didn't respond. Instead, he reached out toward me, his hand cold and clammy. I felt a jolt of pain as his fingers brushed against my skin, a searing cold that burned through me. But I didn't back down. I couldn't. Catherine was counting on me. Summoning all my courage, I stepped forward, holding out the evidence in front of me like a shield. "You can't stop this," I said, my voice stronger now. "The truth will come out, no matter what." For a moment the man hesitated, as if considering his next move. But then slowly he began to fade, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. Catherine's shadow remained, watching me with a look of gratitude and relief. As the lights flickered back on, I realized that the danger had passed. Catherine's story would finally be told, and her killers would be brought to justice. But more importantly, her spirit could finally rest. As I walked out of the office that night, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in days. Catherine was gone, her presence no longer haunting me. But her story would live on, a testament to the power of the truth and the courage it takes to stand up to those who would silence it.